8 psychological rules that build stability. There's a certain kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from doing too much. It comes from feeling like the ground beneath you keeps shifting. You wake up and you're fine. Then something small happens, a text you didn't expect, a plan that changed, a comment that landed wrong, and suddenly you don't feel fine anymore. And the frustrating part isn't even the feeling. It's that you can't explain why you're so affected. You tell yourself you're overreacting, that other people handled this better, that you should be more stable by now. That quiet narrative, the one where your emotional world feels more fragile than it should, is one of the most misunderstood experiences a person can carry. Because from the outside, you probably look like you have it together. You're thoughtful, you're perceptive, you notice things others miss. But internally, there's a kind of low-grade turbulence that never fully settles, and most people who try to help just tell you to think more positively, or worry less, or build a routine, as if the problem were simply that you hadn't thought of that. What they're missing, what almost no one explains clearly, is that psychological stability isn't a personality trait you either have or don't. It's a set of internal structures, and understanding what those structures actually are and where they come from changes everything about how you relate to yourself. The nervous system doesn't distinguish between emotional threat and physical threat. Research in effective neuroscience, particularly work coming out of labs studying predictive processing, shows that the brain is constantly making predictions about what's coming next. Not consciously, automatically. It scans the environment, compares it to past experience, and releases neurochemical signals based on whether the world matches its expectations. When things are unpredictable, when you grew up in an environment where the emotional weather changed without warning, or where safety depended on reading other people's moods, the brain learns to stay in a heightened state of readiness. It's not anxiety in the clinical sense, it's adaptation. The nervous system did exactly what it was supposed to do. It kept you alert, it kept you safe. But that same system, years later, in a life that is objectively less chaotic, is still running the same software, still treating ambiguity as threat, still interpreting a shift in someone's tone as a signal that something is wrong. The groundlessness you feel isn't weakness, it's an old protection strategy that outlived the situation it was built for. And this is where the 8 psychological structures begin, not as rules imposed from outside, but as internal realities that, once understood, start to reorganize on their own. The first is what psychologists call a stable internal locus. This is the quiet knowledge that your sense of self doesn't depend on what's happening around you. People who develop early in unpredictable environments often build their identity outward, reading the room, adjusting to others, measuring their own worth by how things are going. The work of stability is moving that anchor inward, not rigidly, not defensively, just having a consistent place to return to when the external world shifts. The second is tolerance for ambiguity. The nervous system, as we said, treats uncertainty like danger, but ambiguity is the permanent condition of adult life. Learning to sit with not knowing, to resist the pull toward premature resolution, toward forcing an answer just to end the discomfort of the question, is one of the quietest and most significant forms of psychological growth there is. The third structure is what attachment researchers call earned security. Some people are raised with consistent, attuned caregiving and develop a secure base early. Others build it later, through therapy, through relationships that repair rather than repeat old patterns, through a slow accumulation of experiences where trust held. The neurological research here is genuinely moving. The brain remains plastic far longer than we once believed. Security isn't only something you're given in childhood, it's something the nervous system can learn at any age. The fourth structure is emotional granularity, a term from the work of psychologist Lisa Feldman Barrett. People with high emotional granularity don't just feel bad, they can identify whether they're disappointed, or grieving, or afraid, or ashamed, or just tired. This precision matters because the brain regulates emotion partly through language. The more specifically you can name what you're feeling, the more the nervous system can actually process and metabolize it. Vague distress tends to linger, named emotion tends to move. The fifth structure is a regulated relationship with time. A significant amount of what destabilizes people is living primarily in either the past or the future, replaying what went wrong, or anxiously modeling what might happen. Research on temporal self-regulation shows that stability is strongly correlated with the ability to anchor to the present moment without bypassing the past or dismissing the future. It's not about being mindful in the performative sense, it's about being able to actually inhabit the moment you're in. The sixth is what developmental psychologists call self-continuity, the experience of feeling like the same person across time, even when you change. People who lack this often feel like their identity is fragile or provisional. One difficult relationship, one failure, one hard season, and they're not sure who they are anymore. Stability requires a kind of biographical coherence, a story of yourself that can hold contradiction, growth, and loss without fracturing. The seventh structure is what might be called healthy rupture and repair capacity. This one surprises people. The most stable relationships in research, the most stable inner lives, are not the ones where nothing ever goes wrong. They're the ones where things go wrong and then get repaired. The nervous system doesn't need a perfect environment. It needs an environment where breaks in connection are followed by reconnection, where conflict doesn't mean abandonment. This pattern, repeated enough times, rewires the threat response. It teaches the brain that disruption is survivable. And the eighth, perhaps the most counterintuitive of all, is a practiced capacity for grief. Not depression, not rumination, but actual clean grieving. The ability to acknowledge what was lost, what didn't happen, what you needed and didn't get, without drowning in it and without bypassing it. Unprocessed grief doesn't disappear. It accumulates as a kind of background weight, a heaviness that makes the present feel heavier than it is. People who can grieve tend to be more stable, not less. The emotion moves through instead of pooling. None of this is about becoming a different kind of person. It's not about being less sensitive or more positive or less affected by life. People are wired differently, and there is no version of psychological health that looks the same across all temperaments. What these 8 structures share is that they ask nothing about your personality. They ask only about your relationship to yourself, whether you have a stable place to stand inside your own experience. And what's worth sitting with is this: the very traits that make the ground feel unstable, the sensitivity, the hyper-awareness, the tendency to feel things deeply, are the same traits that make repair possible. The nervous system that learned to read the room so precisely is the same one that, with the right input, can learn to feel safe. Not as a project, not as self-improvement, just as a gradual, quiet shift in what feels normal. You are not someone who needs to be fixed, you are someone who adapted, and adaptation, by definition, means the capacity to change again. If something in here felt familiar, not as information, but as recognition, there's more to this than 8 rules. There's a reason certain patterns keep repeating in your relationships, in your work, in how you respond to being seen. And understanding that reason doesn't require going back to dismantle everything, it just requires a different kind of looking.